The dog who waited in the storm revised YouTube story script before anyone knew his real name. The old dog had already been left behind twice. But that night, he was not waiting to be rescued. He was waiting to save someone else. The rain starts just after midnight, soft at first, tapping against the rusted tin roof of the shelter outside Newcastle like nervous fingers. By 12:30, the wind turns colder. Wet eucalyptus leaves scrape across the chain-link fences. Somewhere far beyond the highway, thunder rolls over the Pacific like a warning too old for anyone to understand. Inside kennel number 14, the German Shepherd still hasn't moved. 3 days, 3 nights. No barking, no growling, no pacing, just silence. The workers call him Rex because the old service tag clipped to his faded collar is too scratched to read properly. The silver plate hangs crooked beneath his throat, tapping gently whenever he breathes. Most people avoid looking at him too long. Not because he looks dangerous, because he looks as if heartbreak has finally learned how to sit still. His fur, once thick and dark, is damp around the neck from the leaking roof above his kennel. His ribs show slightly when he shifts position. One ear bends lower than the other. But it's his eyes people remember. They don't look wild. They look tired, like a soul still waiting for a voice that never came back. Poor old boy, one of the shelter volunteers whispers while locking the front office. Still watching that road. And she's right. Every night, Rex sits facing the same direction. Not toward the food bowls. Not toward the other dogs barking for attention. Towards the highway beyond the shelter gates. As if he's listening for something hidden inside the storm. A pair of headlights sweep past outside. Rex slowly lifts his head. Then another car. Another. Every single time, his ears twitch for half a second before lowering again. Waiting. Always waiting. The scent of wet concrete and disinfectant hangs heavily in the air. Somewhere down the corridor, a small terrier cries itself to sleep. A radio crackles softly near the reception desk before cutting into static. The old ceiling fan turns, with a tired clicking sound. But Kennel 14 remains still. Too still. At 1:17 a.m., the power flickers once. Then again, the entire shelter drops into darkness for nearly 5 seconds. When the emergency lights finally buzz alive in pale red, Rex is no longer lying down. He's standing now, perfectly still, facing the gate. Rainwater drips from the edge of the roof outside, splashing against the concrete in uneven rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. Then Rex takes one slow step forward. The volunteer notices from the office window. That's odd, she mutters. Because the dog hasn't stood on his own all evening. She watches him carefully now. Rex walks to the front of the kennel and presses close to the wire fence. Not desperate, not panicked. Focused, the way trained dogs become focused when the world has missed something. His nose lifts slightly into the cold air. Listening. The woman frowns. What is it, mate? Rex doesn't react to her voice. Outside the shelter, another flash of lightning briefly paints the car park white. For a split second, the dog's shadow stretches long across the wet floor like a soldier standing at attention. Then comes the sound. Faint, almost impossible to hear beneath the storm. A distant metallic groan somewhere beyond the trees near the old service road. The volunteer hears nothing. But Rex does. His body stiffens instantly. His tail lowers. One paw shifts backwards. Every muscle inside him suddenly awake. Then, without warning, the old German Shepherd lets out a sound nobody at the shelter has heard before. Not a bark, not a growl. A deep, aching cry that echoes through the dark hallway and stops every other dog cold. Silence crashes over the building. Even the terrier stops whining. The volunteer's skin prickles. Rex turns toward the exit gate again. Waiting, watching, like he knows something terrible has happened beyond the fence. And somewhere beyond the shelter fences, beneath the storm rolling across the Australian coast, a small hand trembles inside a broken car no one has found yet. The storm grows heavier after 2 in the morning. Rain lashes sideways across the shelter yard hard enough to blur the highway lights into pale smears of gold and white. The volunteer finally unlocks Kennel 14 with shaking fingers, unsure why her chest suddenly feels tight. Rex does not rush out when the gate opens. He walks past her slowly, calm but alert, water dripping from the ends of his fur. Then he stops beneath the shelter awning and stares beyond the road again. Somewhere far away, another low metallic sound disappears into the wind. The woman squints into the darkness. Nothing. Just trees bending under rain and the empty service road cutting through bushland near the old quarry. You hear something, mate? She whispers. Rex takes 3 steps forward, then stops, waiting. At the exact same moment, 30 kilometers south along the coastline, a faded blue Uda rattles into a petrol station near Belmont. The engine coughs twice before dying completely. The driver sits motionless for several seconds with both hands still resting on the steering wheel. Ethan Walker looks exhausted even under fluorescent light. Early 30s. Broad shoulders. Rain-dark blonde hair falling across tired eyes that have not properly slept in years. There is dried paint on his boots. Grease stains on his sleeves. A faded tattoo of a German shepherd covers most of his right forearm, the ink slightly stretched with age and old muscle scars. He notices the servo attendant staring at it through the glass window. Most people do. Ethan pulls his sleeve lower without a word and steps out into the rain. Cold air rushes against his face, carrying the smell of wet asphalt, diesel, and ocean salt from the coast. He hates nights like this. Storms always bring the memories back louder. The old caravan park where he lives sits another 15 minutes inland near the bush tracks outside Swansea. Cheap place. Quiet place. The kind of place nobody asks questions. Which is exactly why Ethan stays there. He buys black coffee, 2 meat pies wrapped in paper, and a packet of dog treats without thinking. The moment the cashier scans them, Ethan freezes slightly. Dog treats. Again. You got a dog? The young cashier asks casually. Ethan stares at the packet for one uncomfortable second too long, then shakes his head once. Not anymore. His voice sounds rough from disuse. He leaves before the bloke can say anything else. Outside, thunder cracks across the sky so loudly the station windows vibrate. Ethan climbs back into the Uda and drives north through heavy rain, windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. The roads are nearly empty now. Just long stretches of wet bitumen reflecting pale motorway lights. The radio mutters softly in the background until emergency weather warnings interrupt the music. Flood risk. Reduced visibility. Dangerous conditions near Forest Service roads. Ethan switches the radio off immediately. Silence feels easier tonight. At a red light near the industrial district, his eyes drift again toward the unopened packet of dog treats sitting on the passenger seat. He exhales sharply through his nose. Bloody idiot, he mutters to himself. But he does not throw them away. Nearly 6 years have passed since Atlas died overseas. 6 years since Ethan came home with an empty lead in his kit bag. 6 years since he promised himself he would never work with another dog again. Yet somehow, every few months, he still buys dog treats by accident. As if some loyal, broken part of his brain never got the message. Rainwater crawls down the side windows in slow, crooked streams. His tattoo catches another flash of lightning against the steering wheel. Atlas. The name still sits beneath the inked image of the shepherd's face. Faded now, but not forgotten. Ethan rubs his thumb across it unconsciously before gripping the wheel tighter. Ahead, traffic slows near the coastal turnoff. Blue emergency lights flicker faintly through the rain several hundred meters away. Probably another flooded road. Another breakdown. He barely notices. Then something strange happens. As Ethan drives past the dark outskirts near the animal shelter, a shape suddenly appears near the fence line. A dog. Large. Sitting perfectly still beneath the storm. Ethan only sees it for 2 seconds through sheets of rain. But something about the posture hits him immediately. Not fear. Not aggression. Discipline. The animal does not chase cars. Does not bark. It simply watches the road as if waiting for someone specific. Ethan's hands tighten around the steering wheel. His pulse shifts strangely. The shelter disappears behind him almost instantly. He keeps driving another 100 meters before the feeling becomes impossible to ignore. He checks the rearview mirror. Nothing but rain and darkness now. Do not do this, he says quietly to himself. But his foot already eases off the accelerator. The Uda slows, then finally rolls to a stop beside the flooded shoulder. Rain hammers against the roof while Ethan stares ahead through the fogged windscreen. For a long moment, he says nothing at all. Then somewhere beyond the storm, a distant dog cries out. Deep, hollow, familiar enough to make every hair rise along his arms. Ethan closes his eyes briefly, because for one impossible second, it sounds exactly like Atlas. For almost a full minute, Ethan sits there gripping the steering wheel while rain pounds against the Uda hard enough to shake the mirrors. His chest feels strange, tight, uneasy. The sound of that distant cry still echoes somewhere deep behind his ribs. Logic tells him to keep driving. Go home. Heat up the old caravan. Eat the cold meat pies. Sleep for 4 hours before work. Simple, quiet, safe. But the longer he stares into the storm, the harder it becomes to ignore the feeling crawling beneath his skin. Because trained working dogs do not watch roads like that unless something out there matters. Ethan knows that better than anyone. Another flash of lightning tears across the clouds above the highway. His jaw tightens. Then finally, under his breath, he mutters the one sentence he has spent 6 years avoiding. Ah, hell. He turns the Uda around. The tires hiss through floodwater as he drives back toward the shelter entrance. The building looks smaller up close. Old brick walls stained dark by rain. Flickering security lights. A crooked sign half hidden behind soaked bottlebrush trees. The storm has emptied the streets completely now. No traffic. No voices. Just wind pushing through the fencing in long hollow whistles. Ethan parks beside the gate, but does not immediately get out. He notices the packet of dog treats again resting on the passenger seat. Still unopened. He stares at it for a second before shaking his head at himself. You are not taking in another dog, he says firmly. Absolutely not. But his hands already reach for the packet anyway. By the time he steps out into the rain, his boots sink ankle deep into muddy water near the entrance. The cold hits instantly, sharp enough to sting his face. Somewhere nearby, thunder rumbles again across the coastline. A woman inside the office spots him through the glass and quickly opens the front door. We are closed, mate. She begins politely before noticing his expression. Ethan glances past her toward the kennels. I heard a dog. The volunteer blinks. Yeah, well, plenty of those here. Ethan does not smile. German Shepherd. Older. Bent ear. Her face changes slightly then. Curious now. You mean Kennel 14? Ethan does not answer immediately, but the silence is enough. The woman steps aside slowly. He has been acting odd all night. The smell inside the shelter hits Ethan at once. Wet fur. Disinfectant. Damp blankets. Old timber swollen with humidity. Familiar enough to punch straight through years of buried memories. He hates how quickly his body remembers everything. His breathing changes before he even realizes it. His shoulders tense automatically, instincts waking up one by one like old soldiers answering a call they thought was over. Somewhere down the corridor, a dog barks twice before falling silent again. The volunteer leads him past rows of kennels lit by dim emergency lighting. Most of the dogs sleep curled beneath blankets despite the storm. But Kennel 14 is empty. Ethan stops walking. Where is he? Outside near the gate, the woman says quietly. He keeps trying to look down the service road. Ethan turns immediately toward the rear exit. The moment the back door swings open, cold rain lashes across his face again. And there he is. The German Shepherd stands motionless beside the fence line beneath a flickering security light. Bigger than Ethan expected. Older too. Thick dark fur silvering slightly around the muzzle. One ear bent lower than the other. Rainwater sliding down the broad shape of his back. But it is the posture that freezes Ethan. Completely. Still. Focused. Alert without panic. Exactly like a trained search dog waiting for instruction. Rex slowly turns his head toward the sound of approaching footsteps. Their eyes meet across the rain. Everything inside Ethan suddenly goes quiet. The storm. The wind. The rattling fence. Gone. Just those eyes. Tired eyes. Intelligent eyes. Eyes that have seen too much and somehow kept going anyway. The dog does not bark. Does not growl. He simply studies Ethan with calm recognition that makes the hairs rise along the back of his neck. Then Rex's gaze shifts downward toward Ethan's right arm. Toward the tattoo beneath the rolled sleeve. Ethan notices instantly. So does the volunteer. That is strange, she whispers. Rex takes one slow step closer. Ethan remains perfectly still. Easy, mate, he says quietly, though his voice sounds rougher now. The dog stops less than 2 meters away. Rain drips from his whiskers. His chest rises steadily despite the cold. Then, incredibly gently, Rex lowers his nose toward the tattoo of Atlas on Ethan's arm. Ethan feels his breath catch painfully in his throat. The touch lasts barely 2 seconds. But it is enough. Enough to drag memories from places he has spent years trying to bury. Sandstorms overseas. Helicopter rotors. The weight of military boots on concrete. Atlas running through smoke with ears pinned back and eyes locked forward. Loyal until the very end. Ethan pulls his arm back instinctively. Not from fear. From grief. Old grief. Heavy grief. The kind that never fully leaves. Rex lifts his head again slowly. Watching him. Waiting. Then suddenly the German shepherd turns sharply toward the dark service road beyond the trees and lets out another deep cry into the storm. Longer this time. Urgent. Ethan looks toward the bushland instinctively. At first he sees nothing except rain and darkness between the swaying gums. Then far in the distance, almost hidden beneath sheets of water, a faint blinking light appears somewhere down the old quarry road. White. Then dark again. White. Then dark. Like a damaged hazard lamp struggling to stay alive. The blinking light disappears again behind sheets of rain. Ethan narrows his eyes toward the service road cutting through the bushland beyond the shelter fence. For several seconds, there is nothing. Just darkness swallowing the trees whole every time lightning fades. Then the white flash appears again. Weak. Unsteady. Too low to the ground to be a street lamp. Hazard lights. Somewhere out near the old quarry road. The volunteer beside him squints into the storm. Probably someone bogged in the mud, she says uncertainly. But Rex reacts instantly the moment the light flickers again. The German shepherd stiffens hard enough that water sprays from his coat. His ears rise. His chest expands sharply. Then he begins pacing along the fence with growing urgency. Not panic. Purpose. Ethan feels it immediately. Search behavior. Real search behavior. His stomach tightens. How long has he been doing this? He asks quietly. Since around midnight, the volunteer replies. He would not settle. Kept staring toward the bush. Rex suddenly turns back toward Ethan and lets out a short, sharp bark. The first proper bark either of them has heard from him all night. Then he starts moving toward the side gate. Fast. Ethan watches the dog disappear briefly into shadows near the fence line before reappearing again beside the exit, waiting. Watching. The old instinct buried inside Ethan for years wakes completely then. It is not a thought. It is a feeling. The same feeling soldiers get moments before hearing a call over the radio. Something is wrong out there. Very wrong. Ethan exhales slowly through his nose. Do you have a torch? The volunteer blinks at him. You are not seriously going out there? Another bark cuts through the storm. Rex is already scratching near the gate latch now. Ethan does not answer immediately. His eyes stay fixed on the dark road beyond the trees. Rainwater drips from his jawline. Cold wind pushes hard against his jacket. Somewhere far away, thunder rolls low and deep over the coast again. Then he says quietly, if that dog thinks someone is out there, I trust him. 10 minutes later, the old Uda crawls slowly down the muddy quarry track with headlights cutting weak tunnels through the rain. The windscreen fogs constantly from cold. Air leaking through cracked seals around the doors. Branches scrape against the sides of the vehicle every few meters. Beside Ethan, Rex sits rigid in the passenger seat without making a sound. The dog refused to stay behind once the gate opened. Jumped straight into the Uda like he had done it 1,000 times before. Not nervous. Not excited. Ready. Ethan notices every detail despite himself. The way Rex scans intersections. The way his ears react before distant sounds arrive. The way his body leans slightly whenever the vehicle nears soft ground or flooded dips. Professional behavior. Military behavior. Ethan grips the wheel tighter. Who trained you, mate? He murmurs under his breath. Rex does not look at him. His eyes stay locked ahead through the rain-covered windscreen. Another flash of lightning briefly reveals the old service road winding deeper into bushland. Water rushes across sections of the track now, carrying leaves and broken branches downhill toward the creek bed. Ethan slows near a washed-out bend. Road gets worse from here, he mutters. The blinking light appears again. Closer this time. Maybe 500 meters ahead through the gums. Then vanishes. Rex suddenly stands in the passenger seat. A low sound vibrates deep in his throat. Focused. Alert. Ethan feels his own pulse begin to rise now. Easy. But the dog is already staring hard toward the trees off the left side of the track. Not at the road itself. Ethan follows his gaze. At first he sees only darkness and rain. Then something catches briefly in the headlights. Bent metal. Half hidden below the embankment near the flooded creek. Ethan slams the brakes. Mud sprays beneath the tires as the Uda skids sideways slightly before stopping. For 1 second, everything goes silent except the rain hammering the roof. Then Rex explodes into movement. The German Shepherd launches from the passenger seat the instant Ethan opens the door, splashing through muddy water, vanishing down the slope toward the creek without hesitation. Rex. Ethan grabs the torch and follows immediately. Wet branches whip across his jacket as he slides down the embankment. Mud gives beneath his boots. The torch beam shakes violently through sheets of rain. Then finally the wreck comes fully into view. A dark SUV lies tilted against gum trees near the swollen creek bed nearly 4 meters below the road. One hazard light still blinks weakly through cracked mud-covered glass. White. Dark. White. Dark. Steam rises faintly from the bonnet into cold rain. Ethan's breathing changes instantly. Training takes over before thought can catch up. He scans surroundings automatically. Flood risk. Fuel smell. Vehicle stability. Access points. Rex circles near the driver's side before stopping abruptly beside the rear door. Barking now. Loud. Sharp. Ethan rushes closer. All right. His torch sweeps through shattered wet windows and soaked seats. Empty front cabin. No movement. Then suddenly Rex presses his nose against the rear passenger door and whines hard enough to cut straight through the storm. Ethan freezes. There. A sound. Tiny. Faint. Barely audible beneath the rain. Crying. A child. Ethan's heart slams against his ribs. Jesus. He moves immediately toward the rear side of the vehicle, boots sinking into thick mud beside the creek bank. Inside the SUV, partially hidden beneath deployed airbags and blankets, a little girl no older than 8 stares back at him through tear-filled eyes. Pale. Shivering. Alive. The moment she sees Ethan's torch, her trembling lips part slightly. Mom, she whispers weakly. Ethan swallows hard. Rainwater drips from his hair into his eyes. Behind him, Rex stands perfectly still in the storm beside the wrecked vehicle, chest rising heavily, watching the child like he already knew she was there all along. For a moment, Ethan cannot move. Rain crashes through the gum trees above the creek bed, while the little girl trembles beneath soaked blankets inside the tilted SUV. Her face is pale beneath streaks of dirt and tears. One small hand clutches a stuffed koala pressed tightly against her chest, as if letting go might make the whole world disappear. The hazard light flashes again across the wrecked interior. White. Dark. White. Dark. Rex stays planted beside the rear door, completely focused on the child. Not restless. Not barking anymore. Watching. Waiting. Ethan forces himself back into motion. Hey, he says gently, kneeling beside the broken rear window. You are all right. I have got you. The girl's lips shake from cold. Mom is sleeping. Ethan's eyes flick briefly toward the front seats. 2 adults remain unconscious but breathing, seatbelts still locked in place. Relief moves through him quietly. Alive. All of them alive. The creek water rushing beneath the embankment sounds louder now, though, rising fast from the storm. Ethan knows they do not have much time before the road floods completely. He reaches carefully through the shattered opening toward the rear door lock. Can you move your legs for me? The little girl nods weakly. Rex suddenly shifts position beside Ethan and lets out one low warning sound toward the creek bank. Ethan glances down instantly, water already pushing closer beneath the tires. Right, he mutters. We are moving now. Mud sucks hard against his boots as he braces himself beside the vehicle and pulls at the damaged rear door. It barely moves at first. Metal groans beneath the strain. Rain blinds him every few seconds. Then finally the door jerks open enough to squeeze through. Cold air rushes into the cabin immediately. The girl starts crying harder from shock. Easy, Ethan says quietly. You are doing good. He climbs partly inside despite the cramped angle and carefully frees the child from tangled blankets and seatbelt straps. The smell of rainwater, petrol, wet fabric, and deployed airbags fills the cramped cabin. It reminds him too much of places he has spent years trying to forget. His chest tightens unexpectedly. Not now. Focus. The little girl winces slightly as Ethan lifts her into his arms. She cannot weigh more than 20 kilos. Far too light. Her tiny fingers cling desperately to the front of his rain jacket. Where is my mom? She whispers again. Ethan glances toward the unconscious woman in the front passenger seat. "We are getting everyone out." He says it firmly because children can hear fear even when adults try hiding it. The moment Ethan climbs free from the SUV, Rex immediately moves closer beside the child. The German shepherd lowers his head carefully toward her shaking hand. The girl stares at him through wet eyelashes. "Doggy," she whispers faintly. Rex gently presses against her leg just long enough for her breathing to steady slightly. Ethan notices it instantly. Working comfort behavior. Deliberate. Controlled. This dog knows exactly what he is doing. Another surge of water rushes through the creek bed below. Louder this time. Ethan looks upward toward the muddy slope leading back to the road nearly 4 meters above them. Hard climb even without carrying a child. He exhales sharply. "All right, mate," he says to Rex quietly. "Stay close." Somehow the dog seems to understand every word. Ethan begins climbing carefully through rain-slick mud while holding the little girl tightly against his chest. Branches scrape his shoulders. Wet soil crumbles beneath his boots every few steps. Twice he nearly loses footing entirely. Each time Rex immediately moves beside him, steady and alert, as if guarding every step upward through the storm. Halfway up the embankment, the girl suddenly grips Ethan's jacket harder. "I am scared." Ethan feels something painful shift inside his chest at the sound of those words. Because 6 years ago another voice said almost the exact same thing over a military radio moments before everything went wrong. He pushes the memory down immediately. "I know," he says quietly, "but you are not alone now." Lightning flashes overhead again, turning the rain silver for one violent second. Rex pauses halfway up the slope and suddenly looks back toward the wrecked SUV below. His ears rise sharply. Then he barks once. Loud. Urgent. Ethan stops instantly. Search instinct. Something else. He follows the dog's gaze toward the front cabin again. Through rain and broken glass, he notices movement. The woman inside the vehicle has regained consciousness. Barely. Her head lifts weakly against the seat. Ethan's pulse spikes again. "Stay here," he tells the girl carefully after reaching the roadside above. He wraps her in his own jacket and places her safely inside the Uda with the heater blasting warm air. Rex remains outside the vehicle staring toward the creek below without blinking. Ethan grabs the torch again and heads straight back down the muddy slope into the storm. The woman inside the SUV looks disoriented when he reaches the driver's side window. Rainwater drips from her hair across trembling cheeks. "My daughter," she gasps immediately. "She is safe?" Ethan says firmly. "I have got her." Relief floods her face so suddenly it almost breaks him. Her eyes close for one brief second as tears mix with rain. Then she whispers, "Thank God." But before Ethan can answer, Rex suddenly barks again from above the embankment. Different this time. Sharper. More urgent. Ethan turns instantly toward the road. Headlights. Approaching fast through the flooded service track. Too fast for these conditions. The beams slice violently through the storm as another vehicle rounds the bend above the creek. Ethan's stomach tightens immediately, because the road ahead is already half collapsing beneath floodwater. The headlights tear through the rain like white knives cutting across the flooded service road. Ethan reacts instantly. "Stop," he shouts toward the approaching vehicle while climbing the muddy embankment as fast as possible. But the storm swallows his voice whole. Water rushes harder through the roadside ditch now, carrying branches and loose gravel downhill toward the creek. Above him, Rex stands near the edge of the collapsing road, barking furiously into the darkness. The oncoming four-wheel drive keeps moving too fast. Its tires spray sheets of muddy water in every direction as it rounds the bend. Then suddenly the driver sees the washed-out section ahead. Brake lights flare red through the storm. The vehicle fishtails sideways violently before finally skidding to a stop less than 2 meters from the collapsed shoulder. Silence hits for one strange second after the engine dies. Just rain. Wind. The ticking sound of hot metal cooling beneath the storm. Then the driver door swings open hard. A middle-aged man in a soaked flannelette jacket jumps out immediately. "Bloody hell," he shouts while staring at the half-collapsed road ahead. Ethan finally reaches the top of the embankment, breathing heavily. Mud coats his jeans nearly to the knees. Road is gone further. "Down," he calls out. There is a family trapped below. The man's face changes instantly. "You serious?" Rex barks again sharply beside the Uda. Inside the cabin, the little girl sits wrapped in Ethan's jacket with wide, frightened eyes watching everything through fogged glass. The stranger notices her immediately. "Sweetheart, all right." Ethan nods once. "Mother and another bloke still down there." The man wastes no time after that. "Name is Mick," he says quickly. "I have ropes in the back." Ethan studies him for half a second before nodding. "Country bloke. Solid build. Calm under pressure. Good." Together they move fast through the rain, unloading recovery gear from the tray of the four-wheel drive, while Rex paces near the edge of the embankment without taking his eyes off the creek below. The German Shepherd looks restless now, more alert than before. Ethan notices every movement carefully. The dog keeps glancing downstream between barks. Listening. Calculating. "He yours?" Mick asks while uncoiling rope. Ethan pauses briefly. "Not exactly." Another low growl rumbles from Rex's chest toward the creek bed. Ethan turns instantly. The floodwater has risen nearly halfway up the SUV tires already. "Move," he says sharply. They descend together through rain and mud, carrying torches and ropes. The woman inside the vehicle looks more awake now, but disoriented. Beside her, the unconscious driver finally groans softly for the first time. Relief flickers across Ethan's face. Alive. Still alive. But not for long if the creek keeps rising. "We are getting you out," Ethan tells them firmly. Rex suddenly moves ahead of everyone and plants himself beside the driver's side door. Focused again. Waiting. Ethan kneels beside the damaged frame and works carefully with Mick to force the door wider against twisted metal. The rain makes everything slippery. Twice their grip slips completely. The creek roars louder beneath them now, angry water smashing against rocks somewhere below the darkness. Finally, the door gives enough. The injured man stirs weakly as Ethan helps release the seatbelt. "Easy, mate," Ethan says calmly. "You took a rough hit." The man blinks slowly, confused. "Lucy, your daughter is safe." The words work immediately. Pure relief breaks across the man's exhausted face. Behind them, Rex suddenly barks hard again. 3 sharp barks in rapid succession. Ethan freezes mid-motion. Military search signal. Alert. Danger changing. He turns toward the creek instinctively. A huge surge of muddy floodwater crashes around the lower side of the SUV with terrifying force. The vehicle shifts slightly against the trees holding it in place. Mick swears under his breath. "We need out now." Everything speeds up after that. Together, they help the injured couple climb carefully from the wreck while rain lashes sideways through the trees. The woman nearly collapses twice from shock and cold. Ethan supports most of her weight without complaint despite exhaustion burning through his arms. Rex never leaves their side. He moves constantly between the family and the unstable creek edge like some invisible line of protection only he understands. Halfway up the muddy embankment, the injured man loses footing suddenly. Ethan catches him immediately before he slides backward into the water below. Pain flashes across Ethan's shoulder from the strain, but he says nothing. "Got you," he mutters through clenched teeth. Above them, the little girl spots her parents climbing toward the road and begins crying openly with relief inside the Yuta. "Mom." The sound cuts through the storm beautifully. Human. Alive. Real. The mother breaks into tears the moment she reaches the roadside and pulls her daughter into shaking arms beneath pouring rain. For a few seconds, nobody speaks. They simply hold each other while thunder rolls across the coastline behind them. Ethan steps back quietly, breathing hard. Water drips from his hair and sleeves. Mud stains nearly every part of him now. His shoulder throbs sharply from catching the injured man earlier. But he barely notices, because beside the road, Rex stands completely still again, staring into the darkness beyond the trees. Not at the family. Not at Ethan. Listening. Ethan follows the dog's gaze slowly. "What is it, mate?" Rex's ears rise. Then the German Shepherd suddenly turns and bolts deeper down the flooded surface. Road without warning. Ethan's pulse spikes instantly. "Rex." The dog does not stop. Mick stares after him through the rain. Where is he going? Ethan watches the shepherd disappear into darkness between swaying gum trees. Every instinct inside him screams the same answer. The dog has heard something else. Rex disappears into the storm so quickly that for half a second Ethan thinks he imagined it. One moment the German Shepherd is standing beneath the flashing hazard lights beside the flooded road. The next, he is gone between the dark walls of rain and gum trees. Rex! Ethan shouts again, already moving. Behind him, Mick grabs his arm briefly. Mate, police and ambos will be coming. Let them handle it. Ethan looks back toward the family huddled beside the Uda. The little girl wrapped in his jacket. The exhausted parents clinging to each other beneath the storm. They are safe now. But somewhere ahead, beyond the flooded track, the dog is still searching. Ethan feels it deep in his chest. That same instinct that kept soldiers alive years ago. You learn to trust the dog before you trust your own fear. He pulls free gently. I will be back. Then he grabs the torch and heads after Rex into the darkness. The further he moves from the road, the louder the bush becomes. Wind tears through the eucalyptus canopy overhead with long groaning, sounds like old timber ships at sea. Rainwater crashes from branches in heavy sheets. Mud sucks at Ethan's boots with every step. The narrow service track curves deeper toward the abandoned quarry land, where mobile signal barely reaches on good days. Tonight the place feels almost unreal. Just black trees, floodwater, lightning, and somewhere ahead, the faint sound of a dog moving through the storm. Ethan keeps the torch low while scanning the ground automatically. Paw prints already half erased by rain. Fresh, fast-moving. What did you hear, mate? He mutters under his breath. Then finally, somewhere ahead through the darkness, Rex barks once. Sharp, focused. Ethan pushes harder through the rain. Branches scrape across his shoulders. Cold water slides down the back of his neck beneath the jacket. His injured shoulder throbs from earlier, but he ignores it completely. Another bark echoes closer this time. Then another. Not panic. Location marking. Search confirmation. Ethan's pulse quickens immediately. 50 meters later, the torch beam finally catches movement beside the track ahead. Rex stands near the edge of a steep drainage ditch overflowing with muddy floodwater. His body is rigid, ears forward, tail low, watching something below. Ethan approaches carefully. What is it? Rex glances toward him once before looking back down into the ditch. The dog's breathing comes hard now from exhaustion and rain. Ethan shines the torch downward. At first he sees nothing except rushing water and tangled branches trapped against rocks. Then the beam catches pale fabric moving weakly near the far bank. Ethan freezes. An elderly man lies half-curled against the muddy embankment beneath thick scrub branches, barely visible from the road above. Rainwater rushes dangerously close around him. One arm shifts faintly. Alive. Bloody hell. Ethan slides down the slippery ditch immediately, boots skidding through mud and rocks. Rex follows close beside him without hesitation. The old man looks nearly 70. Thin, gray-haired, wearing soaked pajamas beneath an unzipped cardigan now covered in mud and leaves. His skin feels freezing cold when Ethan kneels beside him. Confused eyes blink slowly toward the torchlight. Margaret, the man whispers weakly. Ethan swallows hard. Dementia. The old man must have wandered during the storm. You are all right, mate, Ethan says gently. We are getting you out. The elderly man stares blankly through the rain. I was looking for the house, he murmurs. Could not find the lights. Rex lowers himself quietly beside the old man then, pressing his warm body gently against the trembling stranger without command. The man's shaking eases almost immediately. Ethan notices it, and something inside him tightens unexpectedly. This dog understands comfort work far beyond ordinary training. Good boy, Ethan whispers before he can stop himself. The words hit him harder than expected, because he has not said them aloud in years. Rex glances toward him briefly through rain-covered fur. Calm eyes. Steady eyes. Then the German shepherd turns his attention back toward the elderly man as if nothing else matters. Ethan removes his own dry thermal layer from beneath the jacket and wraps it carefully around the old man's shoulders. The cold tonight is dangerous. Even in coastal New South Wales, storm exposure can kill quietly, especially at that age. Can you stand for me? Ethan asks quietly. The man tries, but nearly collapses immediately from weakness. Ethan catches him carefully. Easy now. Another crack of thunder shakes the trees overhead. Floodwater surges harder through the ditch around their boots. They cannot stay here. Ethan studies the steep muddy bank leading back to the track and exhales slowly. Carrying the old man uphill alone will be rough with the injured shoulder. Before he can even think further, Rex suddenly climbs halfway up the slope and stops. Waiting, watching Ethan closely. The dog's position instantly reveals the safest footholds through the mud without blocking the path. Search and extraction support behavior. Professional. Deliberate. Ethan stares at him for one brief second through the rain. You really were trained, he murmurs quietly. Then together they begin climbing. Slowly. Carefully. Ethan supports most of the old man's weight while Rex moves ahead, stopping every few meters to check behind them before continuing upward. The storm keeps raging around them, but somehow the dog never loses focus once. Not once. By the time they finally reach the road again, flashing blue and red emergency lights glow faintly through the rain near the distant bend ahead. Police. Ambulance crews. Rescue teams arriving at last. Ethan breathes out slowly in relief. But before he can move toward the lights, one of the paramedics jogging toward them suddenly stops dead upon seeing Rex beside him. The young woman stares at the German shepherd in complete disbelief. Wait, she whispers breathlessly. That dog. Ethan frowns slightly. You know him? The paramedic steps closer through the rain, eyes wide with recognition fixed on the old service tag hanging from Rex's collar. No way, she says quietly. That is Ranger Unit K-97. Ethan's heartbeat slows strangely. The storm suddenly feels very far away. What did you just say? The paramedic looks directly at him. That dog was one of the best military search and rescue shepherds in New South Wales. Rain still falls hard across the quarry road, but the worst of the storm has finally begun drifting east toward the coastline. Red and blue emergency lights flash silently across wet eucalyptus trunks while paramedics move between vehicles speaking in low, exhausted voices. Somewhere nearby, an ambulance door slams shut. The smell of rain, mud, petrol, and wet earth hangs thick in the cold night air. Ethan stands completely still beside the roadside, while the young paramedic kneels carefully in front of Rex. The German shepherd watches her calmly without resistance as she brushes mud away from the old military tag hanging beneath his throat. Her eyes widen again beneath the torchlight. I knew I recognized this number, she whispers. My uncle worked military rescue training outside Canberra years ago. Ethan says nothing. His eyes stay fixed on the dog. What exactly was he asks quietly. The paramedic looks up slowly. Urban and Wilderness Search Unit. Earthquake response. Flood recovery. Missing persons. She glances back at Rex with visible disbelief. Dogs like this were elite level. Rex lowers himself carefully onto the wet roadside then, exhaustion finally beginning to show through the stiffness in his legs. Mud cakes his fur almost black beneath the flashing lights. His breathing remains steady but slower now. Tired. Very tired. Ethan notices immediately. How old? The paramedic studies the faded markings again. Maybe 11. 12 if he is lucky. Ethan feels something sink heavily inside his chest at those numbers. Old for a working shepherd. Too old to still be searching through floodwater and storm debris all night. Yet somehow the dog kept going without hesitation. Kept finding people. Kept saving lives. Nearby, the little girl from the wrecked SUV sits wrapped in thermal blankets inside the ambulance while her mother speaks quietly with police. Every few seconds the child looks through the open ambulance doors toward Rex, watching him carefully, like children do when they instinctively understand goodness before adults ruin the word. Ethan notices that too. Do you know who owned him? He asks. The paramedic's expression fades slightly. No idea. But dogs from those units usually retire into specialist homes. She hesitates briefly before adding, unless something went wrong. The words linger heavily in the cold air. Ethan looks down at Rex again. The old shepherd remains lying calmly beside his boots now, eyes half closed beneath rain-soaked lashes. For the first time all night, he finally looks his age. Ethan kneels slowly despite the ache in his shoulder. The dog opens one eye slightly at the movement, but does not pull away. You were not some stray after all, were you? Ethan murmurs quietly. Rex watches him for one long silent moment. Then, incredibly gently, the shepherd shifts forward and rests his chin against Ethan's muddy boot. The contact lasts barely 2 seconds, but it hits Ethan harder than the storm ever could, because Atlas used to do the exact same thing after missions. Same movement, same quiet trust. Ethan looks away immediately toward the darkness beyond the flashing lights. His throat tightens painfully without warning. He hates that. Hates how quickly this dog keeps slipping through walls he spent years building. Nearby, Mick walks over carrying 2 paper cups of coffee taken from the rescue crew supplies. Steam curls into the freezing night air. "You look like hell," Mick mutters while handing one over. Ethan accepts it with a tired nod. "Feel worse." Mick glances down toward Rex. "Dog saved 4 people tonight." He pauses briefly. 5 if you count old Arthur down there. Ethan stares quietly into the coffee for several seconds. The cup warms his freezing hands instantly. "Yeah. Funny thing is," Mick continues softly, "shelter volunteer told police nobody wanted him." Ethan's jaw tightens slightly at that. Nobody wanted him. The words feel ugly somehow, standing beside a dog who spent the entire night searching for strangers in floodwater. Across the road, one of the police officers approaches carrying a portable radio crackling with static. "Road closures are spreading south," the officer says. "Storm flooded half the highway exits." He notices Rex beside Ethan and shakes his head slowly in disbelief. That dog really found the kid before emergency crews even got the call. "Looks that way," Mick answers. The officer exhales sharply. Bloody miracle. But Ethan is not listening anymore. Because Rex suddenly lifts his head again. Ears twitching. Alert. The shepherd turns slowly toward the dark tree line bordering the flooded service road, watching something invisible beyond the rain. Ethan feels his body tense automatically. What is it? Rex rises carefully to his feet despite obvious exhaustion. Then he begins walking away from the lights. Slow this time. Not urgent. Purposeful. Ethan follows without thinking. They stop several meters from the emergency vehicles where the bush grows thicker beside the road. Rain falls softer here beneath the canopy. Water drips steadily from branches overhead. Rex lowers his nose toward the muddy ground near an old rusted guidepost almost hidden by overgrown grass. Then he stops completely. Ethan shines the torch downward. Half buried beneath mud and leaves lies a weather-damaged leather collar, cracked with age. Faded military stitching still visible along the edge. Ethan crouches slowly and picks it up. The leather feels cold and stiff in his hands. One small metal plate remains attached despite years of wear. The engraving is nearly impossible to read beneath corrosion and dirt. Ethan wipes mud away carefully with his thumb. Then his breath catches. Atlas Memorial Training Division. Retired Service K-9 program. His pulse slows strangely. Rex watches him silently from the rain. Ethan turns the collar over again. Another engraving appears on the back beneath layers of dirt. Handler transfer approved. Unit K-97. Ethan stares at the words while cold rain drips quietly from the ends of his hair. Transfer. Not abandoned. Not originally. Something else happened to this dog after retirement. Something nobody ever finished. Rex steps closer then and gently presses against Ethan's side beneath the dripping trees. Not asking for anything. Just standing there in silence beside him. And for the first time in 6 long years, Ethan does not step away from a dog's touch. By dawn, the storm finally breaks apart over the Pacific like exhausted waves losing strength against rock. Pale gray light spills slowly across the flooded bush tracks outside Newcastle, while emergency crews continue clearing debris from the quarry road. The world smells different after a storm like that. Wet eucalyptus. Mud. Salt carried inland from the sea. Quiet relief. Ethan sits alone on the lowered tailgate of his Uda wrapped in a borrowed thermal blanket he barely notices anymore. His shoulder aches badly now that the adrenaline has faded. Every muscle feels heavy, but the weight in his chest feels stranger somehow. Softer. Nearby, Rex sleeps beneath the open ambulance awning curled against dry blankets provided by the paramedics. For the first time all night, the old German shepherd finally looks peaceful. One paw twitches occasionally in sleep. Dreaming. Ethan catches himself watching the dog longer than he means to, then quickly looks away toward the sunrise bleeding through low clouds over the trees. He knows this feeling. That dangerous feeling. Attachment. One of the police officers walks over carrying a paper cup of tea. "You are Ethan Walker, yeah?" Ethan nods once. "That family wants to thank you before they head to hospital." Ethan immediately shakes his head. "No need." The officer gives a tired smile. "Too late for that, mate. News crews are already sniffing around." Ethan groans quietly beneath his breath. "Fantastic." The officer sits beside him briefly on the tailgate. "For what it is worth, what happened out here tonight saved lives." Ethan stares toward the flooded tree line in silence. "Was not me." The officer follows his gaze toward the sleeping shepherd beneath the awning. Fair point. A few meters away, the little girl from the wreck finally slips free from her mother's side and walks carefully toward Rex, clutching her stuffed koala against her chest. She still wears Ethan's oversized jacket draped almost to her ankles. Her small boots splash through puddles while morning fog curls low across the roadside. Ethan watches closely without realizing it. The child kneels carefully beside the sleeping shepherd. "Hi, doggy," she whispers. Rex opens his eyes slowly. For one long second, he simply studies her in silence. Then his tail gives one tired thump against the blanket. The girl smiles instantly. Pure sunlight after a long night. "Mum says you saved us." Rex lowers his head back onto the blanket calmly, while the little girl reaches out and gently strokes behind his bent ear. Ethan feels something tighten painfully behind his ribs again. Atlas used to react the same way around children. Patient, careful, protective without needing commands. The memory arrives softer this time, though. Less like a wound. More like an old photograph left in sunlight too long. A television van suddenly rolls into the emergency zone, splashing through shallow floodwater near the roadblock. Ethan mutters a quiet curse immediately. Two reporters step out carrying cameras despite the mud and lingering drizzle. "There we go," the police officer sighs. "Told you." Ethan stands at once. No chance. He starts moving toward the driver's side door of his Uda before anyone can stop him. But one of the reporters spots Rex beneath the awning and gasps audibly. That is the dog. Within seconds, cameras are turning toward the shepherd. The little girl instinctively shields Rex slightly with her tiny body while confused by the sudden attention. Ethan's expression darkens instantly. "Back off," he says sharply. The reporters pause at the tone in his voice. Not aggressive. Firm. Military firm. One younger cameraman lowers equipment slightly. "We just want the story, mate. People need to see this." Ethan glances toward Rex again. The old dog now sits awake beneath the awning but looks overwhelmed by the sudden noise and movement. Flashing camera lights reflect in tired eyes that spent the entire night searching floodwater for strangers. "He does not owe anyone a story," Ethan says quietly. For several seconds, nobody answers. Wind rustles softly through the soaked gums overhead while dawn light grows warmer across the flooded road. Then, unexpectedly, the little girl turns toward the cameras, clutching her stuffed koala tightly. "He found me when nobody else knew where I was," she says in a trembling voice. "Please do not scare him." Silence falls almost immediately after that. Even the reporters seem caught off guard. The young cameraman slowly lowers his camera completely. Somewhere behind them, paramedics continue loading gear while radios crackle softly in the background. But around Rex, everything feels strangely still. The little girl sits carefully beside him again. The old shepherd leans gently against her shoulder without taking his eyes off Ethan. Always watching Ethan now. Ethan notices it every single time. Like the dog already made some decision nobody else understands yet. The paramedic from earlier approaches holding a tablet device and several printed records sealed inside plastic sleeves. "I made a few calls to Canberra," she says quietly. Ethan takes the papers slowly. Rainwater stains blur some of the old records, but enough remains readable beneath military seals and faded unit stamps. Ranger Unit K, 97. Primary handler killed during flood rescue deployment. Retirement transfer delayed pending reassignment. Ethan's eyes stop there. Delayed. Pending reassignment. He flips to the final page. Then his pulse slows heavily. Official transfer never completed. Replacement handler unavailable. Dog moved to temporary civilian holding. No further updates recorded. Ethan stares at the words for several silent seconds. Temporary holding. That is how Rex disappeared. Passed between systems until nobody kept looking. Forgotten quietly, like equipment left behind after a mission ends. The paramedic exhales sadly beside him. Looks like someone stopped filing reports. Ethan glances toward Rex lying beside the child beneath the morning light. The old shepherd watches him steadily through tired eyes. Waiting. Not begging. Just waiting. And for the first time in years, Ethan feels something dangerous begin returning to life beneath all the grief and silence he built around himself. Purpose. The road crews finally reopened the lower highway just after midday. Storm clouds drift further out across the ocean, leaving behind washed silver skies and sunlight that feels almost unreal after such a long night. Emergency vehicles begin disappearing one by one from the quarry road until only muddy tire tracks remain beside the flooded bush. Ethan should leave too. He knows that. Go back to the caravan park. Sleep for 12 straight hours. Forget the whole thing before attachment settles too deep into his bones again. But somehow he is still standing beside the open rear door of his Uda, watching Rex drink slowly from a metal water bowl borrowed from the shelter. The old shepherd laps carefully between breaths, exhausted but calm. Every now and then his eyes lift toward Ethan as if checking he is still there. It unsettles him more than he wants to admit. The shelter volunteer arrives shortly after noon, carrying paperwork sealed inside a plastic folder. Her boots crunch softly across gravel while cicadas begin singing again from warming trees nearby. Council regulations, she says apologetically. Since he came through the shelter system, somebody has to officially sign temporary responsibility forms. Ethan immediately shakes his head. No, the woman blinks. No, I am not keeping him. The words come too quickly, too defensive. Even Ethan hears it. Rex pauses, drinking at the sound of Ethan's voice, but says nothing, of course. Just watches quietly beneath the sunlight. The volunteer folds her arms against the breeze. Mate, after last night, there is no chance we are putting that dog back in a kennel. Ethan exhales sharply through his nose. He belongs with proper handlers. Looks to me like he already chose one. Ethan does not answer, because somewhere deep down, part of him fears she might be right. The little girl from the accident suddenly appears again beside her parents, carrying a folded drawing made with borrowed hospital crayons. Her small shoes splash lightly through leftover puddles as she approaches Rex carefully. I made this for him, she whispers. Ethan kneels slightly, so she can place the paper beside the dog. A child's drawing fills the page. A large German shepherd standing beneath rain clouds beside a man with blonde hair and a dog tattoo on his arm. Above them, uneven letters read, "The hero dog and his friend." Ethan stares at the drawing longer than he should. Something inside his chest twists painfully. You forgot the muddy boots, he mutters quietly. The little girl smiles for the first time since the crash. Rex sniffs the paper once before resting his chin gently on top of it. The mother wipes tears quickly from her eyes while thanking Ethan again. He nods awkwardly, uncomfortable with gratitude. Always has been. Before leaving for hospital follow-up checks, the little girl hugs Rex carefully around the neck. The old shepherd remains perfectly still for her. Patient, gentle, protective. When she finally steps away, Rex watches the departing family until their vehicle disappears down the highway bend. Then he slowly turns back toward Ethan again. Always back to Ethan. The volunteer notices it too. You realize he has chosen you, yeah? Ethan rubs tired fingers across his jawline. Dogs do not choose people after one night. Rescue dogs do when the night is long enough. Silence settles between them while warm afternoon wind stirs damp eucalyptus leaves overhead. Somewhere nearby, a kookaburra bursts suddenly into laughter from the trees. Rex finally stands and walks slowly toward Ethan across the muddy gravel. Not begging, not excited, calm. He stops directly beside Ethan's right arm, where the tattoo of Atlas disappears beneath rolled sleeves. Then gently, almost carefully, the old shepherd presses his shoulder against Ethan's leg. Contact. Quiet trust. Ethan closes his eyes briefly. Damn dog. He can already feel the walls inside him cracking in places he spent years reinforcing. The volunteer notices the expression on his face immediately. You lost one before, did you? Ethan looks away toward the distant coastline. Yeah. She nods softly like she understands more than he said. That is the risk with good dogs. Rex lowers himself beside Ethan's boots then and lets out a long, exhausted breath into the warm afternoon air. Sunlight catches silver strands around his muzzle now, age visible everywhere once the storm no longer hides it. Ethan notices a slight stiffness in the dog's front leg too. Old injuries. Old miles. Old service. Forgotten by everyone except his own body. The paperwork rustles softly. In the volunteer's hands. Temporary foster only, she says gently. Just until official placement comes through. Ethan almost laughs at that. Official placement. He already knows how systems work. Files disappear. People move on. Old service dogs become someone else's problem until eventually they become nobody's problem at all. Rex lifts his head slightly and watches Ethan with those same steady eyes that somehow never demand anything yet still ask everything. Ethan swears quietly beneath his breath, then reaches for the folder. The volunteer tries not to smile while handing over the forms and pen. Knew it. This is temporary, Ethan mutters immediately. Course it is. He signs anyway. His signature scratches rough across damp paper, while warm wind carries the scent of salt and wet bushland through the roadside clearing. The moment the pen leaves the page, something changes. Small, invisible, but real. The volunteer clips a temporary foster tag beside Rex's old military collar. The little metal piece swings gently beneath the faded service tag with a soft clicking sound. Ethan glances down automatically. Temporary foster guardian, Ethan Walker. Rex studies the tag briefly before looking back up at Ethan. Then, for the very first time, the old German shepherd's tail gives two slow, steady thumps against the gravel. Not excitement. Relief. Quiet relief. Ethan stares at him for several silent seconds before finally muttering, "Do not make me regret this, mate." Rex simply rests his head against Ethan's boot like he already knows the answer. The caravan park sits quiet beneath the fading gold of late afternoon when Ethan finally drives through the rusted entrance gates. Rainwater still drips from the gum trees surrounding the gravel lanes, and small puddles reflect pieces of sky between cracked concrete slabs. The old caretaker barely looks up from his newspaper as the battered blue Uda rolls past Site 19. Most people in the park mind their own business. That is why Ethan chose the place years ago. No questions, no conversations, no pity. But today is different. Because when the engine finally shuts off beside the narrow caravan, another sound remains. Slow breathing from the passenger seat. Ethan sits motionless for several seconds, gripping the steering wheel while sunlight fades across the dashboard. He can feel Rex watching him quietly again. Waiting. Not impatient. Just alert to whatever comes next. Ethan exhales heavily through his nose. This is temporary, he mutters for perhaps the 5th time that day. Rex blinks once. Ethan almost laughs at himself. Talking to the dog already. Dangerous sign. He climbs out slowly, shoulders still aching badly from the rescue, then opens the passenger door. Rex does not jump out immediately. The old shepherd carefully studies the caravan first. Small aluminium structure. Weathered steps. One outdoor chair beside an empty pot plant long since dead. Wind chimes rusted silent beneath the awning. The place looks exactly like Ethan's life has felt for years. Functional. Quiet. Empty. Come on, mate. Rex steps down carefully onto the gravel. His front leg stiffness shows more now after hours of exhaustion. Ethan notices it instantly. Easy. The dog follows him toward the caravan steps, but pauses halfway there, nose lifting slightly into the evening air, listening to distant birdsong drifting through wet trees. Somewhere nearby, children laugh around bicycles near the communal laundry block. Life returning after the storm. Rex stands still for several seconds, taking everything in, then finally follows Ethan inside. The caravan smells faintly of coffee grounds, engine grease, detergent, and old cedar wood from shelves Ethan built himself during sleepless nights years ago. One narrow couch, compact kitchen, fold-down table covered in unopened mail. Military boots lined neatly near the door. Silence lives heavily inside the place. Rex walks slowly across the worn floorboards while studying every corner with calm discipline. Not nervous. Assessing. Ethan watches closely without meaning to. Search dogs always map exits first. Windows second. Sleeping areas third. Atlas used to do exactly the same thing, entering unfamiliar rooms. The thought lands softer this time, though. Less like grief. More like memory. Rex finally stops near the couch and lowers himself carefully onto the floorboards with a tired groan barely audible beneath evening cicadas outside. Ethan opens the small fridge and stares at the miserable contents. Half carton of milk. Leftover takeaway container. 3 beers. Mustard. Right, he mutters. That will not work. 20 minutes later, he returns from the corner servo carrying proper dog food, bottled water, and an expensive orthopedic dog blanket the cashier convinced him to buy after hearing about the rescue on local radio updates. Ethan drops the supplies onto the caravan table with mild irritation. You are costing me a fortune already. Rex simply watches him quietly from the floor. Ethan fills a clean metal bowl with water first, then food. The old shepherd waits patiently, without touching either, until Ethan steps back slightly. Good training again. Permission-based feeding habits. Ethan notices every detail because he cannot help himself. Rex finally eats slowly, carefully, without greed despite obvious hunger. Halfway through the meal, he suddenly stops and lifts his head toward Ethan. Watching. Ethan frowns. What? Rex glances toward the untouched second meat pie sitting beside Ethan's coffee mug on the counter. Ethan stares back at him in disbelief for one long second. You have got to be kidding me. The dog's ears twitch slightly. Ethan shakes his head while breaking off a small piece anyway. One bite. Rex takes the offered food gently from Ethan's fingers without touching skin once. Respectful. Controlled. The simple contact hits Ethan unexpectedly hard. Atlas used to do that too. Never snatched. Never rushed. Ethan turns away immediately before the memory digs too deep again. Night settles slowly outside the caravan windows. Warm orange light from the tiny kitchenette lamp fills the narrow space, while insects hum beyond the screens. For the first time in years, another living heartbeat exists inside Ethan's home. He feels it everywhere. Strange. Heavy. Human somehow. Rex finishes eating before slowly rising and walking toward the caravan door. Ethan opens it automatically. The old shepherd steps outside into cool evening air and stares quietly toward the distant coastline hidden beyond dark trees. Moonlight glints softly against the faded military tags hanging beneath his throat. Ethan leans against the doorway beside him. You miss it too, huh? He murmurs. Wind moves gently through the caravan park, carrying scents of damp earth and ocean salt. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoes faintly across Newcastle Harbor. Rex remains completely still beside him. Two tired souls standing beneath the same night sky. After several minutes, Ethan finally notices the dog trembling slightly from exhaustion and cold. All right, he says quietly. Inside. Rex obeys immediately. No hesitation. Ethan spreads the expensive orthopedic blanket beside the couch while muttering complaints about ridiculous prices and spoiled military dogs. But the moment Rex lowers himself carefully onto the soft bedding, something changes in the old shepherd's face. Relief. Deep, honest relief. Ethan sees it instantly. The dog exhales long and slow before resting his head against the blanket edge. Safe. The realization lands heavily inside Ethan's chest. How long since this dog truly felt safe? Ethan turns off the main light and settles onto the couch with aching muscles protesting every movement. Darkness fills the caravan except for pale moonlight slipping through curtains. Outside, rainwater still drips softly from the awning roof. For a while neither of them moves. Then sometime near midnight, Ethan wakes suddenly from another old nightmare. Breathing hard. Sweat cold against his skin despite the cool air. The same nightmare. Sand. Smoke. Atlas disappearing into dust while Ethan screams commands into dead radio silence. Ethan sits upright on the couch fighting for breath in the darkness. Then he feels it. Warm pressure resting gently against his hand hanging over the couch edge. Rex. The old shepherd has moved silently beside him sometime during the night. No noise. No panic. Just there. Ethan stares down at the dog barely visible beneath moonlight. Rex lifts his head slightly, but says nothing. Does not climb onto the couch. Does not demand comfort. Simply stays close enough so Ethan knows he is not alone in the dark. Ethan swallows hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. Then, slowly, carefully, he lets his trembling hand rest against the shepherd's neck. And this time, he does not pull away. Morning sunlight slips quietly through the caravan curtains just after 6, painting pale gold lines across the floorboards. Ethan wakes slowly this time. No panic. No choking breath. No desperate reach for ghosts that are no longer there. Just the distant sound of magpies outside and the steady rhythm of another living creature breathing nearby. For several seconds he lies still on the couch staring at the ceiling, confused by the unfamiliar calm settling inside his chest. Then he hears the soft thump of a tail against the blanket beside him. Ethan glances down. Rex is already awake. The old German shepherd lies stretched across the orthopedic bedding with his head resting near Ethan's hand again, dark eyes watching quietly beneath the morning light. No demands. No noise. Just there. Ethan rubs tired fingers across his face before muttering. You really are not planning on leaving, are you? Rex blinks once slowly. Outside, the caravan park begins waking around them. Someone starts an old Holden Uda near the laundry block. A kettle whistles faintly from another site. Lorikeets chatter loudly in the wet eucalyptus trees left shining after the storm. Normal life. Ethan realizes suddenly how long it has been since he noticed sounds like that. For years he moved through mornings like a man underwater. Existing, working, sleeping, repeating. Nothing touched him anymore. But now every little sound seems strangely sharper somehow. Real again. He sits up slowly, shoulders still stiff from the rescue, and heads toward the kitchenette. Rex rises carefully behind him, front leg limping slightly before loosening after a few steps. Ethan notices immediately. We are getting that check today. The dog watches him quietly while Ethan fills the kettle and fumbles through cupboards searching for coffee. Somewhere during the night, the little girl's crayon drawing slid from the counter onto the table beside Rex's military tags. Ethan pauses while looking at it again. The hero dog and his friend. He should hate that sentence. Should reject it immediately. But somehow he cannot bring himself to fold the paper away. Rex moves beside him and gently nudges Ethan's elbow once. Yeah, all right. Ethan mutters softly before finally reaching for the dog food container instead of coffee first. Half an hour later, they walk slowly along the shoreline near Blacksmith's Beach beneath cool morning wind carrying salt from the Pacific. The storm washed most people away from the coast, leaving long stretches of damp sand almost empty except for gulls picking through seaweed near the tide line. Rex walks beside Ethan without leash tension, perfectly matched to his pace despite obvious stiffness. The old shepherd pauses occasionally to sniff driftwood or study distant surfers paddling beyond the break, but he never wanders far. Always close. Ethan notices locals recognizing the dog almost immediately. A woman jogging near the dunes slows down with wide eyes. That is the rescue dog from the news, yeah? Ethan shifts uncomfortably. Something like that. She smiles warmly toward Rex. Good on you, mate. Rex simply watches the waves. A teenage boy riding a bicycle further down the path calls out, "Legend dog," before disappearing around the dunes laughing. Ethan shakes his head slightly. You are getting famous. The shepherd flicks one ear toward him, but keeps walking calmly beside the waterline. They stop eventually near a weathered timber bench overlooking the surf. Ethan sits heavily while Rex lowers himself into cool sand nearby. For several minutes, neither moves much. Waves roll steadily against shore beneath pale winter sunlight. Somewhere offshore, dolphins briefly surface through silver water before disappearing again. Ethan rests both forearms across his knees, staring toward the horizon. I used to bring Atlas places like this after training, he says quietly before realizing he is speaking aloud again. Rex lifts his head immediately at the name. Ethan exhales slowly. He hated water. Weird for a shepherd. The old dog watches him carefully while wind stirs silver fur around his muzzle. Would charge through smoke without blinking, though. Ethan laughs softly once beneath his breath. The sound surprises even him. Because it has been a long time since laughter escaped naturally instead of forced politeness around strangers. Rex shifts closer through the sand until his shoulder lightly touches Ethan's boot. Warm. Steady. Ethan glances down at him. You know what the problem is, mate? The dog's ears twitch slightly. Good dogs do not stay forever. The words hang quietly between them beneath the sound of waves. Ethan feels the old fear rising again beneath his ribs. That ancient fear every handler understands. Sooner or later, the silence comes back. Sooner or later you kneel beside an empty collar wondering how something with four legs carried so much of your soul away when it left. He stares toward the ocean harder after that. I cannot do that again. Rex studies him for several silent seconds. Then the old shepherd slowly rests his head against Ethan's knee. No dramatic gesture. No desperate affection. Just quiet understanding. As if somehow the dog already knows grief does not disappear. It simply becomes lighter when shared. Ethan swallows hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. Wind carries the scent of salt and wet sand around them, while gulls wheel overhead through brightening skies. Then Ethan's mobile phone begins vibrating inside his jacket pocket. He almost ignores it until the screen lights up with an unfamiliar Canberra number. Ethan frowns slightly before answering. Walker. A woman's calm voice responds immediately. Mr. Walker, my name is Claire Donovan from Retired Service Animal Administration. Ethan's expression tightens instantly. Beside him, Rex lifts his head slowly from Ethan's knee. We have been reviewing the file connected to Ranger Unit K-97. The woman continues carefully. And there is something you should probably know about that dog. The ocean rolls quietly against the shore while Ethan listens to the woman's voice through the mobile pressed against his ear. Wind moves softly through the dunes behind him, carrying salt and the distant cries of gulls across the morning air. Beside the bench, Rex remains perfectly still with his dark eyes fixed on Ethan's face, as if somehow he already understands the conversation matters. Claire Donovan speaks, carefully from Canberra, papers rustling faintly in the background. After the flood deployment that killed his handler, the dog was reassigned twice. She explains quietly. Both placements failed. Ethan's jaw tightens slightly. Why? A pause follows. Because he kept searching for people during storms. Ethan says nothing. He simply watches waves breaking along the shoreline while sunlight glitters across moving water. The second family could not manage him. Claire continues. Every time severe weather hit, he would escape fences and run search patterns near roads, bush tracks, and evacuation zones. Ethan slowly looks down toward Rex. The old shepherd watches him calmly beneath the sea breeze. He was not running away. Ethan murmurs quietly. No, Claire replies. He was still working. Silence settles heavily between them. Ethan feels it deep inside his chest. Because suddenly everything makes sense. The shelter gate, the highway, the storm. Rex never stopped being a rescue dog. Even after the uniforms disappeared. Even after the files stopped. Even after people forgot him. Claire exhales softly through the phone. Officially, the department planned to retire him permanently years ago. But there were administrative failures after funding cuts. Ethan almost laughs bitterly at that. Administrative failures. Such small words for a living soul left behind. So what happens now? He asks quietly. Another pause. Honestly, Claire says gently. Nothing official. At his age, no government unit will reclaim him. Ethan stares toward the horizon while the wind moves lightly through his hair. Rex slowly rises from the sand and walks closer until his shoulder rests against Ethan's leg again. Warm, steady, present. But, Claire adds carefully, after what happened during the storm rescue, several organizations already contacted us asking about him. Ethan's expression hardens instantly. What kind of organizations? Media appearances, public events, charity promotions. Ethan closes his eyes briefly. Of course, the hero dog story. Cameras, headlines, people who only notice loyalty once it can be filmed. Rex watches him quietly the entire time. Claire's voice softens further. Mr. Walker off the record? Yeah. Dogs like him often struggle badly after losing a handler. Ethan's throat tightens unexpectedly. What are you saying? I am saying, she answers gently. The reports mention he has not bonded calmly with anyone in years. Ethan looks down again. Rex remains pressed lightly against his leg beneath the morning sunlight. Completely calm. Until now. Claire finishes quietly. For several seconds Ethan cannot answer at all. Waves continue rolling toward shore in endless rhythm, while surfers drift like shadows beyond the break. Somewhere nearby, children laugh near the dunes. Life continuing softly around them. Ethan finally exhales through his nose. I'm not exactly stable company either. Claire laughs faintly at that. Maybe that is why it works. After the call ends, Ethan sits silently on the bench for a long time staring out across the Pacific. Rex lowers himself beside him again without a sound. Neither moves much. The wind carries the scent of salt and sun-warmed sand around them, while clouds drift slowly overhead. Then eventually Ethan reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out the old damaged military collar he found near the flooded bush road. Cracked leather, rusted stitching, forgotten history. Rex lifts his head slightly at the sight of it. Ethan studies the faded material beneath sunlight before quietly unfastening the temporary foster tag from the newer collar around Rex's neck. The small metal piece swings briefly in his hand. Temporary foster guardian. Ethan stares at those words for one last moment, then slowly removes the entire tag completely. Rex watches every movement carefully. Ethan threads the old military collar gently through his fingers before fastening it securely beside the current one around the shepherd's neck. The worn leather rests naturally there, like something finally returned home after years lost in the wrong place. Rex closes his eyes briefly the moment the old collar settles against his fur. Relief again. Deep, quiet relief. Ethan swallows hard against the ache rising behind his ribs. "You carried enough alone, mate," he whispers. The wind shifts around them. Warm. Now. Peaceful. Somewhere above the dunes, a flock of cockatoos bursts suddenly into bright white flight against the blue morning sky. Ethan reaches into his pocket again and pulls out a small engraved dog tag he has not touched in 6 years. Atlas. The edges are worn smooth from years of carrying it hidden away like grief made metal. His thumb rubs slowly across the faded engraving. Then, after one long breath, Ethan clips the tag gently beside Rex's old military collar. The soft metallic click seems impossibly loud beneath the sound of waves. Rex lifts his head immediately. Ethan smiles faintly through tired eyes. "Thought maybe you could carry him too." The old shepherd leans against Ethan's knee once more. No fear, no urgency, just quiet understanding shared between two souls who spent too long surviving alone. Hours later, as afternoon sunlight turns golden across the coastline, Ethan and Rex walk slowly back toward the caravan park together. Side by side, matching pace naturally without commands or leash corrections. People recognize the dog sometimes. Smile, wave, whisper about the storm rescue. But Ethan barely notices anymore. Because for the first time in years, the silence inside him no longer feels empty. That evening, as sunset bleeds orange across wet eucalyptus trees outside Site 19, Ethan kneels beside the caravan steps holding a brand new brass nameplate fresh from the hardware store in town. Rex watches quietly from the doorway while evening wind stirs the hanging chimes overhead. Ethan screws the plate carefully beside the caravan entrance. The metal catches warm sunset light as he steps back to read it. Walker and Rex. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. Just two names finally belonging somewhere again. Rex steps beside him beneath the fading sky and gently rests his head against Ethan's arm exactly where the tattoo of Atlas still lives beneath old faded ink. Ethan places one rough hand softly against the shepherd's neck while cicadas sing through the warm Australian dusk around them. Then after a long silence, he whispers the words neither of them knew they had been waiting to hear. "Welcome home, mate." And if Rex's story reminded you that loyalty can survive even the loneliest years, stay with us. Some heroes wear uniforms. Some wear muddy paws.